of years as part of our work on the Pastoral Stewardship Committee. And I just have to say that tonight's turnout and all of the decorating and the food and the beverages and so on are such a wonderful addition to what we are trying to do here, which is to welcome the parish into these kind of conversations and discussions on a regular basis, now and into the future. So I also want to thank all the people who've been involved in planning this, and to add that I hope you will be back the next time we do this and invite even more people back. It's a real service to our parish, and I think it'll be a good tradition for us to get established here. I have the great privilege of working with Mary Reichardt at the University of St. Thomas. She's a faculty member in the Department of Catholic Studies. She came to St. Thomas through the Department of English and has her PhD in English from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Mary has expertise in Catholic literature. She teaches courses on Catholic literature in the Catholic Studies program. She teaches seminarians. She's written widely in the field. She's also done considerable writing in early American literature and women's literature, Midwest regional literature. I'm intrigued by a book she wrote, an edited version of Mark Twain's writings on Huckleberry Finn. She's the kind of person who's so fun to talk to because she has such a breadth of knowledge about literature in general and American literature in particular. She's, of course, published many articles and numerous books. When I say numerous books, that's just awesome to me. Numerous books is a big deal in our profession, and Mary has done it with great success, and she's very well received. She's written, as you will see from some of the materials that are on the table in the back, she's edited a version of an encyclopedia of Catholic literature, and she's written about women Catholic writers. She's just been very committed to this field her whole professional life. In addition to that, she is a wonderful teacher, and she has been awarded the John Ireland Presidential Award for Outstanding Achievement as a Teacher and Scholar at the University of St. Thomas. She's fun to be with. I think you're going to enjoy what she has to say tonight. I'm so honored and happy to be able to present her to you, and I do that now with a warm heart. And welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Jeannie. What a nice introduction. Can you all hear me? Little louder. I guess I'm shorter than I thought. Can everyone hear? Christopher Staller, he did it. If you can't hear me, just let me know, but I think I can pretty much hear the echo now. So anyway, I'm pleased to be here this evening and address you on the topic of Catholic literature. This is a long and rich tradition indeed, but for many Catholics, I often find one that remains relatively untapped. This evening, I hope to offer you some reflections on the Catholic literary tradition and the Catholic imagination, and I especially would like to address you on the topic of how we can define Catholic literature, what it is. I'd like to start off my remarks, however, with a brief defense of literature in general. In today's impatient, media-soaked environment, it's a fair question to ask, I think, why anyone should take the time to read good literature. And by good literature, I mean skillfully rendered works that represent the human situation in complex ways and on various levels of meaning. Good literature is serious literature. It may entertain, but more often it disturbs, raising more questions than providing answers. Such literature never lends itself to black and white thinking, but concentrates on exploring the gray areas of paradox, ambiguity, and moral dilemma. As an art form, good literature, by its very nature, expresses something about the highest aspirations of the human spirit. It evokes the essential mystery of our lives, often reminding us of our incompleteness, our longing, the limitations of our knowledge. The philosophers tell us that one of the things that defines us as a human is a capacity for aesthetic experience. That is, for wonder at and openness to a thing of beauty or mystery in our daily lives. Like all art, Literature invites that aesthetic experience by making us pause in our daily routine, see things differently, and become more reflective. A humanity, literature can make us more humane, widening our understanding vicariously of human lives, cultures, historical periods unlike our own, and thus making us more generous, more broad-minded in real life. As one critic has put it, quote, "Literature has a definite contemplative role. Ordinary experience is impatient and focused on the familiar. But literature cuts through this pattern, making us more sensitive, sympathetic, and imaginative by presenting to us new insight into old things," end quote. Literature also provides us with what has been called complexity with clarity, that is, a higher vision or a longer vision of a particular situation. A story, after all, compresses time so that we can observe and reflect on the outcome of certain actions or decisions, and thus have a better sense of the unity and coherence of life, even in the midst of the chaos of the everyday. Good literature also has a moral dimension. In his 1989 book, The Call of Stories, Teaching and the Moral Imagination, psychologist Robert Coles demonstrates how literature penetrates deeply into our consciousness, causing us, even long after reading a particular work, to weigh characters' decisions and actions against our own standards, and thus to grow in discernment. As such, Cole maintains that stories have a profound effect on the development of our moral imaginations. He begins his study, in fact, by remembering how his parents, both great lovers of literature, read aloud to each other in the evenings, from classic authors such as Dickens or Tolstoy or George Eliot, and what a deep effect this simple act had on his entire life. Critic Roland Fry sums up then for us the value of a steady diet of good literature. Quote, "The clarification of life, a deeper understanding of the human situation, the charting of pathways between reality and the human soul, the treatment of the universally human in the simple language of humanity, these are the characteristics of great literature. So understood, literature provides insights into the human situation, which we ignore only to the foreshortening of our emotional and moral development," end quote. In her book, Literature in the Christian Life, philosopher Sally Tassell goes one step further, suggesting that great literature can play a significant role in the Christian life, precisely because it aids in the widening of the kind of empathy necessary to growth in charity, the goal and summit of Christianity. As Tassell states, quote, "Literature offers to the Christian invaluable acquaintance. It gives to the Christian, who is called upon to love his fellows with a profound and appropriate love, an entree into the crannies of the human heart that a realistic love cannot do without. What one can learn of the human heart from James or Faulkner or Tolstoy cannot be gained from history, psychology, or sociology books, or even, unfortunately for most of us, from our own experience with our fellow human beings, which is so often stereotyped that we seldom see beneath the cliches of surface relationships," end quote. Christians need the kind of wisdom that great literature provides, Tassell concludes. To Tassell, both the reading and the writing of literature, then, can be a profoundly Christian act. Finally, perhaps the best defense of literature is that Christians are people of the Word, convinced of the intrinsic power of language and of story. After all, God himself seems to love literature, for the Bible is full of it, full of poetry and story, delighting in correspondences and allusions and symbol and metaphor. And Jesus' parables, of course, are also models of good literature, grounded in reality, open-ended, and multi-layered. The deep wisdom they contain is only open to those who, not merely intent on simplistic answers, take the time to reflect on their meaning. So in these brief opening remarks, I've discussed some ways that reading good literature is a worthwhile activity and suggested that it can have a valuable place in the Christian life. But now I want to turn more explicitly to Catholic literature. The Catholic literary tradition is one of the longest and most diverse literary traditions in the world. Complex as it is, this literature, Catholic literature, defies simple definition. Written by persons of all backgrounds and cultures and sensibilities over its 2,000-year history, Catholic literature conforms to no single pattern. It has been produced in all possible genres: fiction, poetry, children's works, essays, plays, and more. Some works are didactic, some apologetic, some autobiographical, some mystical. Some works uphold an orthodox view of the faith, whereas others are critical of Catholicism's doctrines or practices, or they view the church as merely an historical or cultural artifact. Some are literary in the best sense of the word, that is, excellently rendered, complexly drawn, and profound works of art, steeped in a deep yet realistic understanding of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. Because of this wide variety over 2,000 years, defining Catholic literature in a precise manner is usually a difficult task. Rather, as scholars quickly find out, Catholic literature is a term that may be defined in different ways for different purposes. For me, a work of Catholic literature must first of all be good literature, in the way I have previously defined it tonight. And with one fell swoop, that eliminates the Da Vinci Code. And second, it must also employ in a substantial and knowledgeable manner at least some aspect of the history, tradition, culture, theology, or vision of the Catholic Church. As you'll note, the parameters of my definition are purposely broad. My definition is not based on the author's biography, that is, on whether he or she was a baptized, card-carrying Catholic or not, but rather it's based on the nature of the literary work itself, which is a far more reliable measure. My definition then allows for the inclusion of literary works written by non-Catholics. Importantly, it also allows for works that may not depict Catholic characters or events, and yet are permeated by a Catholic sensibility. In fact, much Catholic literature, especially that of today, is defined less by its treatment of overt Catholic subject matter than by a particular Catholic perspective applied to subject matter of any type. And this is an important distinction. More than half a century ago, disconcerted by their naive reaction to her literary works, Flannery O'Connor noted with bitterness her Catholic readers' inability to really read. That is, to look beyond their expectation that the obvious paraphernalia of Catholic life, priests, nuns, the sacraments, and the like, will appear in a literary work and grasp the depth and subtlety of the underlying Catholic perspective conveyed. And the same certainly holds true today. Identifying and understanding Catholic literature requires readers who know what to look for, and who can, in particular, recognize the incarnational and sacramental basis of the faith. It is these concepts I'd like to explore with you for a few moments before turning back to our discussion of Catholic literature. So what exactly is this incarnational and sacramental basis of Catholicism that so underscores its literary art? Because Jesus was incarnated as a human being and went through all human experiences from birth to death to effect our salvation, Catholic Christian thought regards all created matter and all aspects of human life on earth as significant, and indeed as the very arena in which we are to work out our redemption. As a result, Catholicism is relentlessly historical, grounded in a real time and place, and thus placing value on every historical period, every year of the Lord, in which we find ourselves embedded. Salvation is not to be found or holiness achieved, therefore, by bypassing reality or attempting to close one's eyes, Buddha-like, to all that is human. By way of describing this point in his well-known apology for the Catholic faith, Orthodoxy, G.K. Chesterton describes the difference between typical depictions of a Christian saint in a medieval cathedral and a Buddhist saint in a Chinese temple. Quote, "The Buddhist saint always has his eyes shut, while the Christian saint always has them wide open," states Chesterton. "The Buddhist saint has a sleek and harmonious body, but his eyes are heavy and turned inward and sealed with sleep. By contrast, the medieval Christian saint's body is wasted to its crazy bones, but his eyes are frightfully alive. The Buddhist is looking with peculiar intentness inward, while the Christian is staring with frantic intentness outward. If we follow this clue steadily," continues the waggish Chesterton, "we shall find out some interesting things about the Christian faith." End quote. In Catholic thinking, then, there is no glossing over reality in all its glory and all its misery. The most important symbol of the faith is, therefore, not an empty cross, but one with a suffering corpus on it, a constant reminder of God's mysterious connection between suffering and love in his plan for our salvation. By embracing all that is human, the good and the bad, with the intention of loving God and imitating Christ, all things are transformed by grace and become a means to our redemption. So due to the incarnation, the basic pattern of Catholic thought, then, is that of descending in order to ascend. As critic William Lynch writes in his book, Christ and Apollo, there are no shortcuts to insight or beauty. We must first go through the concrete, the real. The way up is the way down, end quote. One sees this pattern at work in many works of Catholic literature, and for example, Dante's Divine Comedy, where in the opening scene, Dante's pilgrim is thwarted when he tries to climb up directly to the light. He cannot do so. To reach the summit, he must rather follow his heaven-sent guide Virgil on the longer, more difficult road, that which first descends into the hell of self-knowledge and repentance before it can ascend to God. Closely related to this point about the importance of the incarnational pattern is the Church's emphasis on sacramentality. Catholicism insists on God's presence in the world rather than absence from it. If all things that exist do so because God has created them, loves them, and sustains them, all things are not only good to at least some degree in and of themselves, but they also have the ability to communicate to us something of the power and the goodness of God. Catholics, of course, formally profess 7 sacraments more than any other Christian sect, and each is a meeting place between the natural and the divine. Among these, of course, the Eucharist in particular powerfully conveys the essential Catholic belief that God is with us right here, now, here on earth, in all circumstances and at all times. By contrast, by reducing the communion service to a mere symbolic gesture or ritual, Protestantism has, in effect, put more stress on God's absence from us rather than presence among us. And the result is a tendency in a Protestant sensibility to see more of a dualism or separation between the human and the divine, the flesh and the spirit, sin and grace. On the other hand, because Catholics see the natural world as sacramentally charged, interpenetrated by the divine, they tend to possess a more integrative habit of mind than non-Catholics, seeing more of a unity between the secular and the spiritual, a continuum of sorts rather than a sharp division. For Catholics, in just one small example, there's a much thinner veil between the living and the dead as we pray for those in purgatory and invoke the prayers of those in heaven. But back to our underlying question, what does this Catholic incarnational and sacramental vision offer the literary artist? And the answer is no less than an entire way of seeing the world. It is, for one thing, enormously liberating, for it encourages writers to describe life just as they experience it, warts and all, without any artificial need to, as Flannery O'Connor once stated, tidy up reality for the sake of a positive or uplifting story. In fact, Catholic literature written with the intent of edifying readers or drawing neatly orthodox conclusions is not only pretty bad stuff, usually, but it defeats itself ultimately by denying this vision. As contemporary Catholic novelist Ron Hansen has put it, such overly pious works tend to, quote, attenuate the scandal of the incarnation by circumscribing the sensual or sordid facts of life in order to concentrate on heavenly actions or aspirations, end quote. Thus, such works, he continues, make a false leap into some distant heaven that is ultimately mere escapism. And as is usual, Flannery O'Connor is far more acerbic. Quote, when the Catholic novelist closes his own eyes to reality and tries to see with the eyes of the Church, the result is another addition to that large body of pious trash for which we have so long been famous, end quote. O'Connor continues, if the writer uses his eyes in the real security of faith, he will be obliged to use them honestly. To look at the worst will be for him no more than an act of trust in God, quote, end quote. So we can expect that writers in the Catholic tradition and imbued with a Catholic vision will pay particularly close attention to reality, to things, to events, to their own shifting moods. A sacramental sensibility scrutinizes the real things in the real world on their own terms, but also with the double sight that leads to a higher vision. The remarkable poetry of a poet like Gerard Manley Hopkins, with its close concentration on the natural world, intense probing of the inner self and its moods, an abiding supernatural perspective provides a fine example of literature written from a deeply sacramental Catholic perspective. Yet another advantage that the Catholic vision offers the writer is the ability to operate in a much larger universe than that allowed for by today's fashionable deterministic theories. In admitting the possibility of the supernatural, of mystery, of a God and an afterlife, a writer has at hand a sense of the essential drama of life. If human beings are created beings with a free will and designed for a noble end, then life is but a journey, a testing ground toward that end. In such a world, the forces of evil are reality, not an illusion, and the struggles of each individual toward God or away from God immensely significant. As writer Paul Claudel once stated, quote, "The advantage of the Catholic religion is that it gives us writers drama," and he capitalizes the D in drama, "in a world where you do not know the yes or no of anything, where everything is lawful, where there is nothing to hope for and nothing to lose, where evil brings no punishment and good no recompense. In such a world there is no drama, because there is no struggle. And there is no struggle because there is nothing worth the trouble," end quote. It is precisely this dramatic sense, the all-important salvation or loss of the soul, that many writers in the Catholic tradition have found a powerful spur to the creation of literature. Many would agree, therefore, that there is a distinctly Catholic way of viewing the world, a Catholic perspective or sensibility that emerges in the work of a Catholic or a Catholic-inspired author, whether or not that author chooses to write about Catholic subjects and characters or not. As the contemporary Catholic poet Dana Gioia has stated in a recent interview, an artist does not just sit down and decide to write a Catholic poem or novel with the expected imagery. Rather, his or her Catholic worldview will permeate the finished product, no matter what its subject matter is. Moreover, in many ways, this Catholic vision, its grounding in concrete reality, its pointing toward mystery and the supernatural, its high sense of drama, supports what great literature does best. One might conclude that there is indeed a natural relationship between Catholicism and literature. This is an idea that novelist Walker Percy explored quite a number of times in his essays, and it's worth quoting him in a little bit of length right now. He says this: "There is a special kinship between the novel as an art form and Christianity as an ethos, Catholicism in particular. In a very real way, one can say that the Incarnation not only brought salvation to mankind, but gave birth to the novel. What distinguishes Judeo-Christianity from other world religions is its emphasis on the value of the individual person, its view of man as a creature in trouble, seeking to get out of it, and accordingly on the run. Add to this the special marks of the Catholic Church, in particular the sacraments, which confer the highest significance upon the ordinary things of this world, and what do you have? You have a character in a predicament and on the move in a real world of real things, a world which is sacrament and mystery, a pilgrim whose life is a searching and a finding. Indeed," Percy concludes, "if one had to design a religion for novelists, I can think of no better than Catholicism," end quote. Now, given this vision, all we've talked about so far, Catholic literature is, and should be, free to explore any type of subject matter, anything within the realm of real human experience. But this has often resulted in friction between authors who believe in the freedom of this vision and their readers, who may regard with suspicion any work of art that doesn't conform to Catholic doctrine. But literature is not theology, but something quite different from it. Thus, some writers have shied away from the label Catholic author, finding that the phrase serves to pigeonhole their work in uncomfortably narrow ways. "I am not a Catholic writer," German author Heinrich Böll once stated emphatically. "I am, rather, a Catholic who writes." And in a recent essay, contemporary Catholic author Valerie Serres, in residence at Notre Dame, states the following: "I don't believe that a Catholic writer needs to be writing about Catholic subjects, but I don't object to the most prickly of them either. I'm all for novels in which Catholicism is a problem, if that's where the writer must dig. It's also fine with me if a novelist chooses a religious crisis, or an institutional crisis, or abortion, or the death penalty, or Paris scandals, or all or none of the above. After all, writers choose their subjects in pretty much the same way all of us choose our dreams. That is, subjects pursue writers, and not the other way around. And often it's the least tasteful or the most threatening subject that insists on being explored. That subject may or may not be identifiably Catholic, but it is certain that a Catholic vision of the world will inform every word that writer chooses, end quote. An understanding of imaginative literature as an art form has been slow to develop in the church, however. The case of Graham Greene's 1940 novel, The Power and Glory, is the classic illustration of this point. As many of you probably know, Greene's novel portrays a fallen priest, a man in persecuted 1930s anti-clerical Mexico who has slipped from his vows. He's an alcoholic and he's fathered a child. Yet the story clearly suggests that the priest's very sins and failings paradoxically lead him to a high degree of holiness. So much so that at the end of the book, he is arguably not only a martyr, but actually a saint. Upon publication in 1940, the book was condemned by the Vatican's Holy Office because it failed to depict the Catholic faith in a, quote, unambiguous and, quote, positive manner. But 25 years later, in the atmosphere of Vatican II, the novel was exonerated by no less than Pope Paul VI, himself a scholarly man well versed in the possibilities of literature. Upon their meeting in 1965, the Pope stated to Greene, "Mr. Greene, some parts of The Power and Glory are certain to offend some Catholics, but you shouldn't pay any attention to that," end quote. The Power and Glory was, in fact, several decades ahead of its time, reflecting a more psychologically complex, deeply realistic vision of the human condition and of the Catholic faith than was acceptable in the pre-Vatican II period. And it's worth noting, just as a sidebar, that the Church's Index of Forbidden Books, initiated during the Inquisition in 1559, was not done so as a suppression for literary art per se, but rather as a means of protecting the uneducated faithful from doctrinal error. And the index was finally abandoned again in the atmosphere of Vatican II in 1966. Well, there are a few other fruitful connections between